What's up, everybody? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com, part of the Medium Large Sports Network. My name is Jeff Spiegel, and joined today by special guest, one of the newest members, or the newest member of the Dodgers beat. That would be Sonja Chen of MLB.com. Sonja, welcome to the Dodgers world, and welcome to DodgerHeads.
Hey Jeff, thanks so much for having me. It's exciting to be here and exciting to be covering the Dodgers.
Well, I told you right before we came on, I would love to. You're going to be somebody that we all see on our social media timelines. We're signing up for your newsletter, reading your stuff over on MLB.com. You've been with MLB.com and the Bay Area over the last couple of years, it sounds like. But tell us a little bit about kind of the journey for you to getting to being a Dodgers beat reporter.
Sure. So this was actually or no, obviously not this current job, but with MLB.com, that was my first job out of college. So I was filling in mostly often for visiting teams. So I did have the Dodgers for I think like one series in
Okay.
each of the past 3 years. But yeah, it was like a different team every series pretty much. So it was, kind of a lot every week. A lot of preparation, and really I was excited about the prospect of one day getting to really dig in on one team. So eventually we got to the point where we had the opening, and I was lucky enough to get this job, and I'm so excited to dive in and get to kind of do what I've really been dreaming of.
Yeah, well, you picked a good time, as you know, to start covering the Dodgers. One question that I wanted to ask you just right off the get go is, um, as somebody who's coming in to sort of the Dodgers ecosystem and has covered them kind of in a sense from afar. Obviously, you can't like write about baseball in any way, shape, or form and not be familiar with the Dodgers and what's going on. But I'm curious for you, now that you're here and you've been here for a few months and you've seen just the not only the World Series they won, but the insane run of spending that they have been on since. Like, as somebody who is not necessarily all the way into the internal workings quite yet, like I'm curious how you are experiencing this first rush of Dodgers moves.
Yeah, it's been, I mean, in some sense, it's almost what I was expecting, but you know, with every transaction, it's like, are they done yet? and
Exactly.
and they just haven't been.
Yeah.
It's been really interesting because just I've seen how the perception of the team has kind of changed, like especially these two off seasons where, people in the Bay Area, they've been coming to me and they're like, I don't like the team you cover. Like they're just trying to buy another World Series. And I feel like, 3, 4, 5 years ago, like that's
Yeah.
not how they were looked at all, really, because yes, they did have some big contracts, but they had so many more, homegrown players, and that's still something that they do really well, I think. So
Yeah.
it's yeah, I've just been kind of fascinated to see how that's changed, and then now being closer to the team, it's I think I have more of an opinion on it too,
Yeah.
because yeah, it's like you see the effort that the team puts in, and you don't want them just reduced to being a big spender when they do so much more than that. I feel.
Totally. And I would almost argue that the way that people are responding has more to do with the fact that the Dodgers are the defending World Series champions than it actually does with the money they spent. Like, I think if the Dodgers had lost at some point in the postseason run last year, my view, Sonja, and I'm curious if you agree, is I don't think people would be complaining nearly as much or as loudly about the Dodgers spending. If anything, I feel like the Dodgers would be getting made fun of. Like, oh, here you go, keep dumping money on this and keep coming up short in October. And yet it's like, because they went and won, now people are irritated about how they've handled the last few months.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's like, they kind of, other people don't want the Dodgers to have it all, which, I would totally totally
Yeah.
empathize with that. When some team seems to have everything going in their direction, that can, absolutely be frustrating if you're a fan of a different team. But yeah, I think if they had lost in the first round to the Padres, which certainly could have
Almost
happened,
happened. Yeah.
it's yeah, we would be having a very different conversation at this point. I mean, I remember when the Dodgers signed Ohtani, and a lot of people were kind of saying like, "Oh, well, that to be eliminated early,"
Yep.
and now it's yeah, the Dodgers are ruining baseball, so
Yeah.
very very different.
Well, on the note of the Dodgers going out and spending money and doing things, I had a couple questions for you. I'll start with one that's kind of been the talk of Dodgers news cycle over the last week or so. Bill Plunkett went on Dodgers territory and was asked about Kiké Hernández, and his reporting was that he has not heard anything on the Dodgers side about Kiké Hernández. Now, he didn't say, he didn't give his own interpretation of that information necessarily. There could be a lot of pieces to that. I think there's some speculation that the Dodgers have kind of maybe worked something out with Kiké where it's like, wait till we can open up some space on the 40-man roster. There's other speculation that, maybe they're telling the truth. And as long as a guy like Chris Taylor is still on this roster, if he remains on this roster, maybe there isn't room for Kiké Hernández. So I'm curious, A, if you've heard anything, or B, kind of how you interpret the Kiké Hernández Dodgers relationship and how it might be resolved.
Yeah, so I will say that I just came back from vacation, so I am kind of playing catch up a little with like recent conversations. But I guess the way I would interpret the situation is, I do feel like it would be kind of difficult to have space for both Chris Taylor and Kiké Hernández on this team. And between the two of them, there are certain trade-offs, I guess, but it's any like full 40-man roster, it's difficult to create space, but especially with the Dodgers, what they have, and even when they have to like make room for Kirby Yates, that's going to be really difficult. It's tough decisions ahead. But I mean, there's something about Kiké Hernández and the Dodgers though, and in the postseason especially, where I think he's really just the kind of spark plug they need, and I think he would still be really beneficial to have on the roster from that kind of perspective. I don't know what the current conversations are like surrounding that, but I have to feel like they're, as long as there's some mutual interest, and I'm sure that there is some interest, even if the Dodgers recently haven't been talking about it, I think there might be a way where something can get worked out, and maybe it will be closer to when pitchers and catchers report. But I mean, last year, something that really struck me was, I think Dave Roberts said this, like that he and Brandon Gomes and Andrew Friedman were talking about what they needed to make a deep postseason run. And they were like, we need Kiké to, win these games. And it's a new year and a new roster, but I think that he would still certainly add the kind of fire that they need.
Totally. And one thing I've said on our show is I don't exactly know who the Dodgers, if they do want Kiké Hernández, are competing against, because I think the Dodgers are the only team in baseball who can look at a guy who for 3 straight regular seasons has been like a well below average baseball player and say, that's fine. We're going to pay him $5 million. He's going to take up a 26-man roster spot for the entirety of the season because we know we're going to be in the postseason. And once that comes, he's going to be valuable to us. So I do think there's a piece of this that with Kiké specifically, the fact that he's still a free agent, I think some people are like, well, that's because he's telling other teams, hey, it's a done deal. I'm going to the Dodgers. I wonder if he maybe has less options than the average Dodger fan thinks, because as Dodgers fans, which is what I am, like, we overvalue Kiké because of the unique situation the Dodgers ecosystem has created.
Yeah, and I kind of wouldn't be surprised if that's the case, because it's, it's a thing where certain players in certain environments just seem to do better, or they really, are the best version of themselves. And I feel like, that's totally been the case with Kiké and the Dodgers. And, could other teams use him in some capacity? Like, sure, but they're probably just not really perceiving him the same way. And I think that's totally fair to do, seeing how he's done in the regular season recently. But I mean, I think he's someone who the Dodgers definitely couldn't have won the World Series without last year. But you can also, again, like say that for a lot of the roster, which is what makes the full 40-man such a difficult situation.
Totally. And before I get flamed in the comments below by all the people who love Kiké Hernández, I want to make clear, like, I have advocated all offseason that they should bring him back. And I in my world, criticizing the player he's been in the regular season and then valuing what he is in the postseason, like, that is a net positive to me. I'm pro Kiké. I want to make that clear as we discuss this. One other thing, you kind of mentioned the Kirby Yates situation. He's all the reporting has been he has agreed. The Dodgers have not made the signing official, which is that is when they would need to make a 40-man roster spot. You and I are recording this on Thursday afternoon. So by the chance this gets posted, it's possible that something has come out about how they go about and fit everybody onto the 40-man roster. I guess I'll ask you this question this way, and I know you've been away, and you're new to the Dodgers. Like, do you envision this being is it going to be a small move that gets them to roster compatibility here, or do you think it's possible that there's kind of a surprise out there in order to free up a spot on the 40 man?
Yeah, that is tough to say. I think when I was trying to like work this through myself, I was kind of envisioning something smaller, maybe a trade for, for prospects essentially that then, opens up a space. Like if you're looking at relievers, then I feel like maybe the most likely candidates would be like Ryan Brazier or Anthony Banda, which again, it's like both very valuable, both very, yeah.
I got crushed on our show for suggesting that Bonda, because he has no minor league options remaining, might get traded. And so we'll see. But I know that those are the two names that made the most sense to me. And so Chris Taylor, of course, the other name in the mix.
Yeah. And Chris Taylor, too. I mean, I think, I also suggested at some point that he might be a trade candidate. But, it's similar to with Kiké, it's like I don't think the value is as obvious in some ways because of how he did offensively last season and the past couple years. But again, I think there's a lot of value to Chris Taylor in his game still with his positional versatility, and there's still something there. I guess the Dodgers would probably just need to include more in a trade to get another team to take on that contract. So I guess I would envision something a little smaller just because it feels like, the roster is taking shape more and it feels like it's in a good spot to where there doesn't need to be some shakeup. But at the same time, I feel like I've been surprised this offseason, as I kind of said, with how, they've just continued to do big things. And, Andrew Friedman, he wants to be as aggressive as possible this offseason to hopefully avoid, having to buy too much and by the time the trade deadline comes around. So, I'd say never for anything big remaining.
Yeah. Speaking of moves, Dave Roberts and his contract, you wrote over on MLB.com about a month ago how Dave Roberts was sort of the extension was a priority. And obviously you're not wrong that we're a month later and nothing has happened, because the Dodgers have kind of all along said, once the roster takes shape, then we're going to sit down with Dave Roberts. And it doesn't seem like anybody is worried about this. Then they go out and sign Kirby Yates. So right when you think the roster maybe had finished taking shape, obviously Clayton Kershaw is a guy that everyone's expecting come, February 11th might be a Dodger. Kiké Hernández, again, as we talked about, could be another guy in that list. Like, what do you think? What are you sensing is the timeline on this Dave Roberts? Like, do you think before pitchers and catchers report in the next week and a half, 2 weeks, that Dave Roberts is going to have a new deal?
I think it could be a possibility, but the last time he was extended, it was the end of spring training. So I think it might be one of those situations where both sides are pretty confident that something will get done, and so they're not necessarily in a huge rush. And at Dodger Fest on Saturday, I'm sure we'll talk to like Brandon Gomes and Dave Roberts about it and maybe get a little more information. So, it's one of those things where it is a priority, but I wouldn't call it overly urgent is kind of my reading of the situation, because again, I don't think there's really any situation where Dave Roberts is not the manager of the Dodgers in 2026. I'd be pretty shocked.
Yeah. One other player I want to ask you about, again, because it was somebody you wrote about on MLB.com, but it's somebody who was in the Bay Area. You probably have a little more familiarity with Michael Conforto than most of us. You wrote that you think Conforto is going to be kind of an under the radar signing for the Dodgers, which again is part of the laughability of the Dodgers, where a guy who making $17 million is going to go, he goes under the radar in LA. He would not be going under the radar in any other franchise, I don't think, for the money he's being paid. But your article makes the point of how much better he was away from San Francisco than he was in San Francisco. This was in many ways the same argument Dodgers fans were making about Teoscar Hernandez a year ago. It's like, well, look how much better he was away. And that kind of panned out. So what have you seen from Conforto from being in the Bay Area, and how might that translate to Los Angeles?
Yeah, so I mean, the funny thing about Conforto is that I pretty much only saw him play at home. So
Fair.
I kind of was, among those who, when the signing was initially, reported and then announced, I was a little surprised
Okay.
that he was getting, 17 million. But once I did kind of dig in, I looked at, his underlying statistics and, the skill set, and kind of remembered I had watched like some games here and there with him on the road, and it it was different. I mean, he's still an impact player.
Yeah.
It's yeah. I mean, Oracle Park is so tough on just about everyone, but especially left-handers. And I feel like whenever I did see him play on the road, it just felt like he was just making things happen a lot more often. So I think it could be really big for him to be in a different environment. And I think the caveat, which I want to say I mentioned, is that his career numbers at Dodger Stadium aren't super great either. But,
Yeah.
It's not like he's played that many games in a season there. So who knows how it would, pan out with closer to 80 games, and working with the Dodgers player development staff too, because
Totally.
I'm sure that will help him also going forward. But
Yeah.
I think there's a lot more in there than we saw the past 2 years in San Francisco.
The stat you had in here, 17 of his 20 home runs were hit on the road, 51 of his 66 RBIs. I mean, again, without going into the math of like, did he play 50% at home and 50% of the road, whatever. It's like, still, even if we're talking 60-40, the fact that 85% of his home runs and, whatever, 80% of his RBIs came in half of his games does not appear to be a fluke when it's a park, as you've mentioned, that kind of this all tracks with. So let me ask you one more question before we let you go. Again, we appreciate you hopping on with us. Pitchers and catchers reporting just around the corner. There's so many things that we could talk about when the Dodgers and spring training. Some of the highly rated prospects who are going to be in camp. Obviously, Roki Sasaki showing up and sort of entering the Shohei Ohtani Dodgers ecosystem, and how that might affect things or not affect things. From your perspective as a beat reporter, who's kind of always maybe thinking about storylines and things to cover and angles to take, what are you maybe most intrigued by or interested to see play out when pitchers and catchers report and this Dodgers team starts to like assemble for the very first time?
Yeah, I mean, it's a cop out to say there are a lot of things, but
Yeah.
truly there are a lot of things kind of going through my head. I'm really interested in seeing how this, potential 6-man rotation shapes up, toward the back end, especially. Because I kind of wonder if like Dustin May, for example, might be better served in more of a relief role. But
Yeah.
right now he seems more, poised to be the number 6, I think, if I have my math right.
Yeah. It's hard to keep track of which Dodgers starting pitchers are going to be healthy at the beginning of the season, which guys are due back a month in. And then you've got to figure out, Gonsolin, May, Bobby Miller, like Landon Knack, like that. How do you even stack the guys who are healthy too? So to your credit, it's a more challenging task than many people might realize.
No, exactly. It's, there's so many names who could feasibly be in this 6-man rotation. And, I have to think that spring competition will kind of factor into the, like 5-6 starters. So like that's something that I'm very curious to see how that will play out, and kind of overall Shohei Ohtani's rehab, which again this weekend I'm sure we'll hear a bit more about that at Dodger Fest. But I'm curious to see how he does, coming back from the shoulder injury and of course the UCL repair, because in 2020, and it's for so many reasons so difficult to kind of apply that to this situation now. He barely pitched that season because he did kind of struggle coming back, but it was also the weird pandemic season and the summer camp, I think they called it. I'm trying to remember. So it was just a very different situation across the board. And I don't know how much of that we can learn from when we think of like what to expect from Ohtani as a true two-way player in 2025. So I'm sure we'll get more of an indication of that and what his workload will be like. And yeah, I'm just really curious to see how it all gets handled. And, the goal, of course, is not for him to be like right out the gate doing everything perfectly. It's for him to be his best on both sides of the ball in October, ideally. So maybe it will be a bit of a journey, but it's also Shohei Ohtani. So you never really know.
I just love thinking about like having been to spring training and covered it before. I'm just thinking about how funny it will be when like people show up and it's like Blake Snell who signs this massive contract, Tanner Scott who signs this massive contract. They're going to be like the sixth guy in line. People they might not even have anybody around them because of the Ohtani factor and Roki Sasaki and all of the different pieces and things that the Dodgers have done this offseason. Not to mention Dalton Rushing and Zaire Hope and these guys who have all this promise who will be in camp as well. There are just so many storylines and so many interesting pieces to think about and how they fit together. And to your point, there's like a 6-person competition for 2 pitching slots on the opening day roster. In addition to Clayton Kershaw and Shohei Ohtani kind of recovering from injuries, there are so many things going on. And so it's going to be a fun and interesting spring at the very least. That is Sonja Chen, brand new Dodgers beat reporter for MLB.com. You can check out the Dodgers Beat newsletter. You can subscribe to that, get that emailed to you over on MLB.com. So Sonja, thank you again. And, enjoy your first spring training with the Dodgers.
Thanks so much. I can't wait for it.
All right, everybody. Thanks so much for joining DodgerHeads presented by DodgerBlue.com. As always, you can subscribe and ring the notification bell down below. Find our podcast, Apple, Spotify, and Google as well. Enjoy the rest of your day. As always, go Dodgers.